Welcome to the premiere episode of In the Gap, a podcast about how and why Black women aren't getting their green. I'm your host, journalist Chandra Whitfield. On In the Gap, you hear from real women and experts alike discussing the many ways that the gender pay gap impacts the lives of Black women in the American workforce.
You better listen, my brother, 'cause if you do, you can hear there are voices still calling from across the year.
Dear friends, welcome to the Labor Radio Podcast Network series, highlighting the work of our members. The growing network of over 90 shows in 5 countries serves as a one-stop shop for audiences looking for labor content and as a resource for labor broadcasters, podcasters, and content producers. My name is Evan Papp, and I produce Empathy Media Lab's podcasts on labor, political economy, arts, and culture, and we're a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. Today, I'm speaking with Chandra Whitfield, host and producer of In the Gap podcast, with episodes featuring everyday Black women and experts sharing their personal experiences on how the gender pay gap, pay discrimination, and systemic inequality affects the lives and livelihoods of Black women in the American workforce. Chandra, so good to see you. And I would like to begin with learning more about your background, where you grew up, and what got you interested in labor issues.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. As you mentioned, I'm Chandra Whitfield. I am a journalist and have been a journalist since 11th grade, which is a little fun fact about me. And anyone who knows me knows a few things about me, one of which is that I am a very, very proud New Orleans native. Notice I didn't say New Orleans. And so I grew up in New Orleans and spent basically the first 13 years of my life in New Orleans, which if you've ever lived in New Orleans, it's like another world, another country. So even though I left at the age of 13, I moved on to Atlanta, still in the South. And so now I jokingly say I'm half Atlanta and half New Orleans. But New Orleans, of course, is deeply rooted in me. And just grew up in a, very proud African-American community. And, just really into the culture and learning about, myself and everything. As far as labor, I don't know that I was, immediately aware of labor issues or the value of them. But I will say one of the biggest things that I'm very proud of is that my grandfather and many of my relatives actually worked for the post office, the United States Post Office. And I learned in the research from my podcast, believe it or not, about how much of a role the post office in particular played in elevating African Americans to the middle class. It was a solid paycheck, it was steady work, and it was a real opportunity. So in many ways, even though I wasn't aware, I benefited from it because I also learned through my work that I had during Hurricane Katrina that I had grown up in New Orleans as at one of the oldest established middle class planned suburban communities in the country. And this was built out of separate but equal and all of that. But a lot of the people in our neighborhood, they worked at the post office, and this gave them a chance to have the picket fence, so to speak, the nice life with the parks and the homes and the sidewalks and your kids playing. So I would just say labor unions and just the labor market actually impacted my life and gave me an opportunity to live a comfortable life growing up.
And you've also been a journalist and reporter. What is your experience? That can be a very precarious existence as well. So what has been some of your experience on just labor in that sector for people who may have no experience or awareness of it?
Yeah, as a journalist, you kind of key in on, issues of injustice, issues of impropriety, and things like that. So definitely covered that over the years. And also just being a journalist. This is literally the only job that I've really had. So really understanding like your rights as a worker, and like things like overtime and all those things. Like just as a worker, I had to learn like what my rights were, because it is very easy, I hate to say, in our industry to get exploited. It really is. And to some degree, it all relates to my podcast, I guess, when I thought about it. But women in particular, I've noticed in the workplace a feeling like they have to do even more and extra to be accepted, to get promoted and things like that. And so I guess I've been sort of like that. I call it my little secret Rosa Parks, in that I've always advocated for employees and their rights, and encouraged people and myself to speak up in those things. Even though I was not part of a union, you realize that you realize why unions exist when you are a member of the American workforce. So I completely applaud that, and applaud the work that is done, and really just understanding how it impacts the lives that we live, and the fact that we all want work-life balance, and these unions, they not only fight for that, they also fight for safe conditions and things like that. So I'm actually, just bow down to the work of the labor unions.
And a lot of people haven't grown up with labor news and labor media, and it's starting to take off over the last few years, probably because workers are starting to struggle more than ever before, at least in the last couple decades in the U.S.
Mhm.
as the inequality grows and everything else. So could you talk a bit about your show In the Gap and why you wanted to start it and what it's about?
Yes, I actually produced it through funding from the Leonard C. Goodman Institute for Investigative Reporting. And I had a fellowship with In These Times magazine, which is based out of Chicago, and they have a deep, deep, deep labor connection. It's a huge part of their readership and the interest that they have. And I have a funny story. I had actually applied for the fellowship before, and they basically told me, oh, this topic would not resonate with our audience. And I came back and I said, I really want this fellowship. And I started doing some research, and then I learned about the gender pay gap, and the fact that Black women are paid significantly less money for the same work. And I've heard estimates in the you know 900,000 range of Black women losing over the course of a 35-year career. And when I thought about my life as a mom, as a working person, as a parent, and thinking, I will have to put my kids through college, pay my mortgage, have transportation, have some quality of life with, 900 and something thousand dollars less. And I'm fortunate because I happen to be married, so I have that. But if you look at, Black women, you know, almost 80% of Black women are head of household and the breadwinner of their household. So this is a deep reality. And it trickles down into quality of life issues for the entire Black family if this is what's happening. So I the funny thing about this is, as a journalist, sometimes you're covering topics, but as I started doing this podcast, I started thinking, wait a minute, I'm probably a victim, so to speak. I don't maybe victim is not the word that I want to say. I've probably fallen prey to this, and started really going through my own career and realizing, like, yes, you think you're interviewing all these people about their experience, but I am an African American woman, and I realized I have probably lost all kinds of money that I never thought about all these years. And so the funny thing about the podcast, it's changed me. I've advocated for more, I've negotiated more, and that's some of the things we talk about in the podcast.
And I think one of the ways that prevents us from organizing is that we all see ourselves as individuals oftentimes in this, and we don't see the systemic inequalities and exploitations. And $1 million over the course of a career And I believe you write on your show that Black women still only make 62 cents on the dollar compared to white non-Hispanic men. So what were some of the most egregious stories you uncovered on your show?
Honestly, I had a couple of, you always want to test your audience or see how people are reacting. So early in the process, I was encouraged to share the episodes with a few colleagues and friends who are Black women, and said, several of them said they couldn't get through it because it was so emotional because they've experienced that. One particular story was Jazz. She's a retail worker. She worked at Walmart and Target. But she particularly had a very bad experience with, basically running her department in the store, but having a white male who came in on a temporary part-time basis, offered a management job over her and in front of her. So just a total disrespect. And the gentleman actually, well, I shouldn't give it away, but his reaction was pretty surprising. So hopefully people will listen to it. And I was shocked at his reaction as well. We also have a woman, um, Brandon, who actually was pregnant, and motherhood is a huge part of this issue for women, but also for Black women, being that they are often single parents or head of household, breadwinner. And this woman just mistreated. She was going through a difficult pregnancy and having to basically be you know, mistreated at work because she could not do certain things despite having a doctor's, notes and things like that. And one of the things she talks about is that she had come back from a hospital, and basically no one even asked how she had been doing, but her coworker's dog had died the day before, and they decided to pass a card around for the dog. And they were doing illegal things to her, knowing that she had a medical condition. And then there's also women who've had to take legal action because of these, because of how they were treated. And we opened this season with a woman, Aja, who actually by chance in conversation discovered that her white male coworker was making, just $40,000, not $40,000, $40,000 more for the same exact job. And she had actually been there longer. So a whole salary more, and with no explanation. And what I try to do, and I think sometimes we miss this in a labor discussion, is yes, you fight, you have your lawsuits and you do all that, but just what this does to the psyche, what this does to you mentally. And this is why I personally applaud anyone who does take this on, because it's very difficult to fight when you're also being treated this way. And I wanted to give voice to that as well. Like, not just say fight the power, which is very important. Believe me, I do believe that. But I also know that we need to sometimes pause and look at the human toll that this takes. And Susan de Carava, she is one of our labor experts. She is head of the News Guild, the New York Guild, and she does a fantastic interview. And I see why she's president, because she had me ready to walk. I was ready to go picket. And so I try to balance this in a podcast. So it's emotional, but we talk about the law, but we also talk about the history of labor unions and the value that they bring. So I just wanted to give voice to this issue and not make it about if this happened. Let's just embrace the fact that it is happening and what we need to do about it.
That's beautiful. And a part of the unions too is transparency on payments. So I worked in the federal government, so similar to the post office and things like that. You're on a very clear pay scale. You have a very clear steps as you move up, and it's very transparent where everyone's at. You can look them up.
Exactly.
And some people may say, well, I'd rather it be more private. Well, you get into this type of issue
Exactly.
where the racism and systematic exploitation can happen. And
Absolutely.
things about unions create that transparency. So taking a step to look at the technical aspects of your show, part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network is to build solidarity amongst other podcasters and radio producers and to share best practices and things like that. How did you come up with your format, and what's your process of from the pre-production
Oh
to
gosh.
the editing and post, and how is that process?
Well, the podcast, believe it or not, it came out of me going to a workshop, and I worked with House of Pod based in Denver, which is like a incubator, and got fired up about podcast and decided to turn my fellowship project into a podcast. And the beauty and the craziness of it is that I had never done that. I mean, I've worked in television, I've done some radio, but I had, kind of been in print world for a while. And so I decided that I really wanted to do this. What I didn't count on was that I would be learning and it's going great, and then a pandemic hits. So I was doing everything in a studio. I was learning the equipment. It was great, and it was what I wanted. I wanted to learn and grow as a journalist because I'm really intrigued with podcasts. And then the pandemic hit, and so then I had to make an adjustment. I mean, a lot of the interviews were done on Zoom. A lot of the interviews were done by phone because at that point the studio had been closed for I think it was ultimately closed for 3 months. So it was a learning experience. We started the podcast, and we were writing intros and scripts and all that, and ultimately everyone kept saying the intros are boring. So after and by the way, this is 12 episodes, I should be clear. Someone should have told me that's crazy, by the way, to do 12 episodes in your first season ever in life as a podcaster, but I guess I'm crazy like that. But I will say that after I think we were about 8 episodes in, my team decided the intros were boring, and I had to re-record 8 and finish the rest. So we decided to do sort of a teaser where you would hear excerpts from the interviews, sound bites and things like that. And I agree that it was good, but anyone out there, decide on your intro before you record 8 episodes. And it was tough because as I mentioned earlier, I am a parent, so I was suddenly cast into homeschooling and producing a podcast, and then also when George Floyd situation happened, I became hot property as a Black woman journalist. So I was juggling freelance work, the podcast, homeschooling, and just this thing called COVID going on across the globe. So I'm glad that I'm sane after all of that. And so I think that's the beauty of any challenge. And, and I believe in challenging yourself. So if you're out there, challenge yourself, but just be mindful. Maybe you should do 6 episodes and not 12. That's still a challenge to do 6. So, but I will say, I cannot believe I got through it. It was very intense. And other thing that how they say, which if you did it again, I would definitely have a producer. I would definitely have a producer. I had to oversee all edits, just writing everything. So it was intense. So I'm happy to say I'm still standing. And there were many days that I wasn't sure if that was going to happen.
Yeah, that's a lot. So, and then trying to re-record these intros and things, with
Yes.
all the chaos going on around
And
you.
this, Evan, like you say it in your head, but then when it comes out of your mouth, you're like, cut. So it's like you're recording the intro like 12 times. I was like, oh gosh, Chandra, what have you gotten yourself into? So I'm very proud of the work. And like I said, I'm driven by something deeper, but honestly, between COVID, the kids, and producing a podcast, it was one of the most intense experiences of my life, and I've done a lot in journalism.
Yeah. I I find podcasting to be a, pretty steep learning curve, and
Mhm.
hearing your voice, getting comfortable with it. But there is this transformative process where you find your voice. The more you do it, the more you hear yourself, the more you cringe at hearing yourself, the more mistakes you make. Over time, if you can stick with it, you start really finding your own voice, which so often in society we are told to be quiet, or we're told to defer to other people. And to find your own voice, I think, is a very empowering process as well. However, the editing for even I'm a pretty good editor for other people's work, but for my own edits, I'm always like, that should stay in, that should stay in. That's where it's so important to have
Well,
the
I will be
dialectic and
calling
feedback.
you if I do a podcast again, because I am definitely getting a producer. I need it. I like the collaborative feel. As long as that person's not way off on some old, like we need to have some synergy. But I like another person's, thought process and, well, what do you think? And because we did have to, cut. I was told that the best length was 30 minutes, and so, but it takes a while to warm people up. So most of the interviews were an hour. So we had to figure out how to cut out 30 minutes, which was a lot. So things that I learned a lot, and I feel like I would like to do another one. Funding is always the challenge. So anybody out there, I'm looking, but I feel like I learned, like you said, enough where now I know when I go into the next project, I'll have a game plan. I know what needs to be thought out, all of those things. But I think it's very important. So for those who are doing a podcast, like, even if you don't necessarily have a paid team, I mean, I think that's good. If you can just have some like-minded people just listen to your ideas, because I think you should work out a lot of details before you actually start recording. You need to think about my intro, who's my audience. I mean, all of those things. And I did go through that process, but I would just say, there's definitely room for collaboration and just getting feedback. And a lot of the changes were from feedback, like, oh, this was interesting, but you didn't really grab me in the beginning, so I wanted to give people a reason to stick around for the, because I mean people say some amazing things. I mean, they really do. They talk about negotiating. We talk about the labor unions. One of my favorite episodes is called Roots, where we talk about the history of Black women in the labor force. And it's pretty funny because it goes against every stereotype that's been put out about, the Black community in particular, but Black women, that Black women have always worked. We've always had the highest representation of women in the American labor force of any race. And that continues, it continues. And Black women, interestingly, what makes this so devastating is that Black women are leading in entrepreneurship. Black women are leading in, politics, determining, races. And Black women are also leading in educational attainment. So it doesn't line up with that. Why should you have all of that going, and you get paid less than other people, particularly men, and particularly even women of other races? So uh, that's what makes this unique, is that Black women, by and large, obviously not every single Black woman, but are doing things quote unquote right, yet we're not getting what we have actually worked for. You go to school, you get these degrees, you get master's degrees, PhDs, trainings, and you should be compensated for that. And I could go on and on, believe me. I have some, I could go on and on about, a lot of the uncompensated work that happens, and how we are often exploited in the workplace, sadly.
Well, I feel humbled being a part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and meeting people like you, and learning a lot as well. And you have a beautiful show, and everyone should check it out. And so, in closing, looking into the future of organized labor, where do you see opportunity and hope?
I see it in the Black community in particular, but and of course, because my podcast In the Gap is about Black women, I think that that's the future, because you have a group that is clearly disenfranchised, clearly not getting their due. And as I mentioned the George Floyd situation, I think that, the irony of everything happening in 2020 and COVID and all that is the George Floyd situation. And for the first time, some people, not me, but some people are waking up to a reality that they never embraced or accepted, that there are inequalities in our society. And I feel like Black women in particular are educated, they are informed, they are part of our labor history of our country, why we have made some strides in the labor world. And so I feel like that is a group that needs to be tapped. I need to see more Black leadership. And I also saw, like I said, I am for labor unions because my episode where we talk about the history, but there also has been racism in the labor world. And I need to see more leadership, more people that look like those who are facing the inequality leading and having a decision-making role. And I do think, a lot of, you look at Kamala Harris and all of those people, and they get it done. They get it done. And if you want things done, I say, hey, embrace Black women. We'll help you. We'll roll up our sleeves and help, because and the beauty of it is that everyone benefits. Everyone has benefited from a safer workplace. Everyone has benefited by certain parameters being in place. And I feel like it doesn't really matter like who does what, but the reality is it benefits us all, and this is an American issue, and we need to address it. So I applaud you all for just illuminating this, because I'll say, even though it was part of my family, this podcast taught me what I did not know about the history of labor unions, and we need to engage in that more. So anything you can do to raise awareness about what's going on in the workplace, I support. So thank you so much for having me on. This is such an honor.
Chandra Thomas Whitfield, In the Gap. Everyone should listen, and thanks for all the work you're doing, and I look forward to fighting with you in the trenches.
Right. Well, same here. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to just be a part of it. And as you probably mentioned, it's available at all the major platforms. I will say, because the term In the Gap is pretty popular, it would be helpful to put in my name after it if you're searching for it on the different platforms like, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and such. So thank you so much, and fight the power.
You better listen, my brother, 'cause if you do, you can hear there are voices still calling from across the years. And they're crying across the ocean, they're crying across the land, and they will until we all come to understand. None of us are free, none of us are free, none of us are free, if one of us is chained, none of us are free, 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 if one of us is chained, none of us are free. There are people in darkness, they just can't see the light. If we don't say it's wrong, then that says it's right. We got to feel for each other, let our brothers know we're here. Got to get the message, send it out all loud and clear. None of us are free, none of us are free, none of us are free, if one of us is chained, none of us are free. It's the single truth we all need to see. None of us are free, if one of us is chained, none of us are free. Well, I swear to you, salvation isn't very hard to find. None of us can find it on our own. We got to join together.